Evolution by natural selection is a core scientific model that was set out by Charles Darwin and has been confirmed again and again in every branch of biology, and it is indeed a theory. Creationist attempts to promote their beliefs, such as intelligent design or the flat earth, are not testable and therefore are not science. Fossil species are identified according to their external form. This is termed the morphological species concept. Speciation often occurs by the establishment of a barrier and the isolation of part of a previously interbreeding population. Evolution takes place both within species lineages, which is phyletic gradualism, and at the time of speciation, which is punctuated equilibrium. The first model is commonest among asexual microorganisms that live in the open oceans, and the latter in sexual organisms that are subject to environmental and geographic barriers. Punctuational evolution, where most changes occur at speciation and are separated by long spans of stasis, where the species evolves but within limits, appears common. Many examples of evolutionary trends, one-way changes in feature or features, are in reality more complex. The idea of progress in evolution, change with improvement in competitive ability, is hard to demonstrate. The evolution of life may be represented by a single branching phylogenetic tree. Cladistics is a method of reconstructing phylogeny based on the identification of shared derived characteristics or homologies. Genomic data provides powerful evidence for reconstructing and dating the tree of life. There are major efforts to generate ever larger phylogenetic trees comprising thousands of species, and DNA has been extracted from fossils such as woolly mammoths, but not from truly ancient fossils. Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882, laid the framework for evolutionary biology 160 plus years ago. He is not commonly thought of as a paleontologist, however, but indeed he did work on fossils as a young man and used his knowledge in constructing the groundwork of his understanding of evolution. What did Darwin say, and why are his ideas so influential today? Despite millions of essays, books, and websites that discuss evolution, no one has yet falsified Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection, and so it stands as the core of modern biology and paleontology, just as Isaac Newton's laws stand at the heart of much of modern physics. And of course, you can read Thomas Kuhn's book on paradigm shifts. And so this is the current paradigm in biology. And yet, surprisingly, Darwin is quoted and misquoted, rather, by many special interest groups who want to use him in support of or against their views on politics, sociology, and religion. So it is important to understand what Darwin said, how his insights affect science today, and how paleontology both provides key evidence for evolution and relies on modern evolution as its basis. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, published in 1859, is usually remembered as the book that made the case for natural selection as the mechanism of evolution, sometimes called survival of the fittest. Of course, that was termed by Henry Spencer, not Darwin. Since the time of Darwin, evolution has been seen in action in the laboratory and in the field, and paleontologists use the principles of evolution to understand how species originate. The origin of species is also core to a second theme in Darwin's writings, namely phylogeny, or the pattern of evolution that is often represented as a branching tree diagram. Darwin's idea was that life had diversified to millions of species by the continued splitting of species from a common stem. Indeed, he proposed that all of life, modern and ancient, could be followed all the way back down the phylogenetic tree to a single point of origin. Modern evidence confirms this remarkable insight. Darwin's branching diagram also explained for the first time the meaning of the natural hierarchy of life that Carl Linnaeus had discovered 100 years earlier. This natural inclusive branching hierarchy is the basis of modern approaches to discovering the tree of life, which is the single great evolutionary tree that links all species, living and extinct, from the modern biodiversity of over 10 million species back to a single hypothetical species 3,500 million years ago in the Precambrian. Paleontological aspects of evolution, such as the tree of life and studies of processes over thousands of millions of years, are sometimes called macroevolution, or macro meaning big, big evolution, to distinguish them from microevolution, micro, small evolution. All of the smaller scale and shorter term processes studied by biologists and geneticists in the laboratory or in the field. Concerning evolution by natural selection, the night of September the 28th, 1838 was pertinent for Darwin. It was then that he realized the missing piece of the evolutionary puzzle, natural selection. He wrote in his autobiography that, quote, "I happened to read for amusement Malthus on population, and being well prepared to appreciate the struggle for existence, which everywhere goes from long continued observation of the habits of animals and plants, it at once struck me that under these circumstances favorable variations would tend to be preserved and unfavorable ones destroyed." End quote. On that date, he drew a simple branching evolutionary tree in his notebook, and a more elaborate version was the only illustration in The Origin of Species. Darwin came to his flash of inspiration through a combination of thoughts and observations. He had seen the huge biodiversity of life during a 5-year-long circumnavigation of the world on board the Beagle, a British surveying ship. He asked himself why life was so diverse. Every island he visited had different plants and birds. He had seen evidence for relationships in time and space. In South America, he saw the bones of giant extinct ground sloths and armadillos, obviously close relatives of living forms, and as he went from island to island in the Galapagos and elsewhere, he saw that the plants, reptiles, and birds show degrees of similarity in proportion to geographic distance. He also was aware of the record of fossils in the rocks, and that fossils changed through time, and seemed to progress from simple forms in the oldest rocks toward modern forms in the Pliocene and Pleistocene. Thomas Malthus argued in his book, An Essay on the Principle of Population, in 1798, that human populations tend to grow far faster than their food supply, and Darwin transferred this concept to the natural world, seeing that reproductive rates are higher than they need to be. Thus, by the month of September in 1838, Darwin understood that what drove evolution. The idea of evolution had been expressed by many thinkers before, who had argued that life had not been the same forever, but that species changed and never stopped changing. Darwin, however, had a rich understanding of modern geographic variation. Why, he asked, does every island in the Galapagos archipelago have a different set of species of small birds when the same set would do perfectly well throughout? Further, why did the bird species on neighboring islands look more similar to each other than those on distant islands? So his first key insight was that life is more diverse than it ought to be if it had been created, and his second key insight was that all species living and extinct can be linked in a single great evolutionary tree that shows their relationships and that tracks back to a single ancestor. These are descriptive observations of pattern, but Darwin is remembered most for his third insight, and this was the principle of natural selection, a process that explains the diversity of life and its branching history of relationships. Quote, only the organisms best adapted to their environment tend to survive and transmit their genetic characteristics in increasing numbers to succeeding generations, while those less adapted tend to be eliminated. End quote. Darwin made the case with remorseless logic, and this can be dissected into a series of clear statements. 1. Nearly all species produce far more young than can survive to adulthood. That is Malthus's principle. Second, the young that survive tend to be those best adapted to survive. Larger at birth, faster growing, noisier in the nest, faster to escape predation, less disease, etc. 3. Characteristics are inherited from parent to offspring, so the characteristics that ensure survival, such as size, aggressiveness, speed, freedom from disease, etc., tend to be passed on. 4. These survival characteristics will increase generation by generation. The changes are not inexorable, so cheetahs run fast enough to catch their prey, not at 2,000 kilometers per hour, because they do not have to, and their bodies would fall to bits if they did, or tried. So, each of these observations can be supported by huge numbers of observations. For point number 1, note that most plants and animals produce hundreds, thousands, or millions of offspring. If every melon seed grew into a melon plant, or every cod egg became an adult, melons and codfish would soon cover the surface of Earth to a depth of hundreds of meters. For point 2, observe any litter of puppies or nest of fledgling birds and see how siblings compete with each other for their parents' attention. For point number 3, observe your parents or children and see the evidence for inherited characters. Also, for point 4, consider how this emerges from points 1 through 3. Evolution by natural selection is on the one hand rather simple, but also rather complex, and it is frequently misunderstood or misrepresented. Darwin's origin in 1859 said it all, and he said it so well. Darwin described natural selection in action when he said, quote, "It may be said that natural selection is daily and hourly scrutinizing throughout the world every variation, even the slightest, rejecting that which is bad, preserving and adding up all that is good, silently and insensibly working whenever and wherever opportunity offers, at the improvement of each organic being in relation to its organic and inorganic conditions of life." End quote. And in our next reading, we will cover how evolution and the fossil record and why intelligent design is not science. So next we will talk about the fossil record, and then we'll talk a little bit about why intelligent design is not science. And very briefly, though, I did mention the tree of life, so paleontologists and biologists are using morphology and molecules to put together ever larger sectors of the tree of life that Darwin originated. There we go. So that's macroevolution. Next, we will talk about evolution in the fossil record. We'll cover what a species is, what is a species, certain concepts like that, and naming, describing, and classifying fossils.